Well, that would be fantastic. Hello, Anne. I'm glad you were able to join us. We are looking at the animal on our whiteboard. It is an invertebrate, and we are making some observations. I'm unlocking your whiteboard, Anne and Paul. If you could go ahead and make some observations about the animal on our whiteboard. Okay, you guys have some great characteristics up here. I'm going to go ahead and put a few more up here for you guys. This week in class, we are going to switch from talking about fish and sharks. We're going to switch over to talking about invertebrates, which are animals without a backbone. This crab is an example of an invertebrate. So I'm going to go ahead and make my own set of characteristics in red. So this is an invertebrate. Now you wouldn't know that just by looking at it, but I know that a crab is an invertebrate. I know that it has an exoskeleton. An exoskeleton is a hard outer shell. I know it has no backbone. I know that it has jointed legs or appendages. I can tell that by looking at the crab. I know that it has something called bilateral symmetry. Does anyone know what bilateral symmetry is? Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a guess as to what bilateral, or if you know, what bilateral symmetry is. This crab has bilateral symmetry. No guesses? All right, bilateral symmetry means that you can take the animal and basically draw a line down the middle of the animal, and the two halves are the same. So his right side is the same as his left side. Symmetry is something that is very important when we talk about invertebrates. So we are going to go ahead and jump right in to symmetry today. Now at the end of class, hopefully we are going to have a few more presentations of our animal profiles that we didn't get to share last week. So you guys made some great observations about the characteristics of this animal. It has two black eyes, perfect. It's brown. It walks sideways. Has a rounded shaped body. It has eyes that are up and away from its body. It has claws. It looks like it's on a beach, and it is an invertebrate. Great job. So we are going to switch to our PowerPoint screen, and we are going to look at some different types of symmetry, since it is something that is very important in figuring out what type of invertebrate you are looking at. The first type, the type that this crab was, is called bilateral symmetry. And I have a picture of a different crab up here as well. Bilateral symmetry means that a single plane or a single line can divide the body into two mirror images. So if you look at the crab on the bottom here, I have a gray line that divides the crab into a right side and a left side that are pretty much identical. They're mirror images of each other. Some other examples of animals with bilateral symmetry. Bi, the prefix means two. Two sides symmetrical. Are a dragonfly, spiders, and various beetles that I have pictures of right here. This is the easiest type of symmetry for me to decide on. The next type of symmetry is radial symmetry. Radial symmetry is a little bit more difficult. Radial symmetry means that it, being an animal or an organism, can be cut in half along many different planes that allow for nearly identical halves. So for example, on here we have a type of anemone. All of those different planes or those different lines that go through the organism are cutting it in half. There's an identical right and an identical left. Two identical sides no matter which way you cut this animal. That means it has radial symmetry. And the last type of symmetry is asymmetry. And asymmetry means that it cannot be divided into mirror images. Up here there's a picture of a sponge, a sea sponge. There is no right and left side. You just can't divide it into a right and a left. So it is called asymmetrical. Raise your hand if you think you understand the three different types of symmetry. Bisymmetry, or bilateral symmetry, radial symmetry, and asymmetry. Go ahead and raise your hand if you think you understand the three. Okay, perfect. You can put your hands down. We are going to take a look at what type of symmetry each of the following animals or pictures of animals exhibits. So here we go. Here is our first animal. Okay, and I'm going to release a poll to you guys, and we are going to see what we get. We'll talk through the first few together. Here is our animal. It is a type of moth. I want you to tell me if you think this is bilateral symmetry, meaning you could make one single line down the middle and have an equal right and an equal left side. If you think this is radial symmetry, which means you can make cuts lots of different places in this animal and have two equal halves, or if it's asymmetrical, which means there is no way you could cut this animal in half to make two equal sides or two equal halves. So do you think this is bilateral, radial, or asymmetry? Just waiting for one more guess. Bilateral means that there's two halves, and that is what is happening in this picture. If you took a mirror or a line and you drew it straight down the middle of this moth, down his abdomen, you would have an equal right and an equal left side, and that is bilateral symmetry. Great job. Let's look at this animal. This is a sea sponge. Now, does this sea sponge show bilateral symmetry, radial symmetry, or asymmetry? Go ahead and take a guess. Is this bilateral, which means you can split it in half into two equal sides? Is it radial symmetry, which means you could divide it in half in lots of different places? Or is it asymmetry, which means you cannot divide this equally in half? What do you think? Okay, there was one correct answer up here. The correct answer to this is asymmetry. If you look at this sponge, there's nowhere where you can divide it in half and have an equal right and an equal left-hand side. Okay, so let's try this one. Well, not this one. Another example. Here we have an elephant. Now, in our elephant, what type of symmetry is being shown? Remember, bilateral means there's an equal right and an equal left-hand side. Radial symmetry means you could cut it in half in lots of different places. And asymmetry means there is nowhere that you can cut the animal in half and have two equal sides. Which do you think it is? Awesome, all of you got that correct. Great job. This is bilateral symmetry. Fantastic. The next picture is not a picture of a living organism. It is just a picture. If you were to look at this picture, does it have bilateral symmetry, meaning you can only divide it into an equal right and an equal left-hand side? Does it have radial symmetry, meaning there's lots of different places that you could divide this picture in half? Or does it have asymmetry, meaning there is nowhere that you can make two equal halves out of this picture? Is this radial, bilateral, or asymmetry? Awesome, good job, 100% again. This is radial symmetry. Fantastic. Now this picture looks a little bit weird because I wanted a straight front picture. So let's see, is this picture of the dog's face bilateral, meaning you can only divide it into a right and a left? Is it radial, meaning you could divide it into two halves in lots of different places? Or is it asymmetry, which means you could not divide it anywhere and have two equal halves? Perfect, 100% again. We are going to do one more just to make sure we've got this. And now let's take a look. Is this bilateral, radial, or asymmetry? This is asymmetry. There is nowhere that you can take this picture and divide it into 2 equal parts. Good job. It is radial symmetry. So the different types of symmetry are very important when we're trying to decide what type of invertebrate we are looking at. Now, there are lots of invertebrates. However, we are only going to talk about marine invertebrates, and we're only going to get to talk about a few marine invertebrates today because there are just so many. So I went ahead and I picked my favorites. There are 31 different phyla of invertebrates. Most of them have marine members, but we are only going to talk about a few of them in this presentation. These are the major phyla of invertebrates. There are porifera, which means hole bearer, and these are things like sea sponges. We're going to see examples of these in a minute. There are cnidarias, which are stinging nettles like sea anemones, hydroids, corals, and jellyfish. There are mollusca, which means soft-bodied, like snails, sea slugs, bivalves, cephalopods, and chitons. There are annelida, which are segmented, like segmented worms. There are arthropoda, which means jointed limbs, like the crab we looked at, or shrimp, amphipods, isopods, and barnacles. There are echinodermata, which means spiny skinned, like sea stars, urchins, sand dollars, sea cucumbers. And there are urochordata, which means tailed chordates, like sea squirts and larvaceans. Now, I don't expect you to memorize any of this, so we'll start with that. We are just going to become familiar with some of these animals. Does anybody want to volunteer to read this slide about porifera? Any volunteers to read about porifera? No one wants to volunteer this early in the morning? All right, DeAndre, go right ahead.
Simplest multi-celled animal, no organ systems, group of individual cells working to make a multi-celled animal. A filter feeder on plankton, often bacteria. Specialized cells pump water through body. Skeleton can be fibrous and or contain siliceous or calcareous spitals. About 50% in Puget Sound. Often produce toxins for defense against predation.
Awesome. Thank you very much for volunteering to read. Porifera are very simple invertebrates. They have no organ system. Here's a couple of pictures of porifera over on the side here. Now, porifera you may find washed up on the beach. If you do, they are usually bleached, so they're usually like a yellowish or a whitish, a light color. And a sea sponge would be an example of porifera. Our next phyla we're going to look at are cnidaria. Now, cnidaria are definitely a type of invertebrate that I'm sure you have heard of. Would anybody like to volunteer to read about cnidarias for us? Okay, cnidarias are kind of the next step up in terms of complexity of invertebrates. They are simple, but they do have an organ system. If you look at these animals, if you look at these animals, they have radial symmetry, which means they can be cut in lots of different places, and you'll still have two equal halves. Okay, Paris mentioned that I just froze on her computer. I shut my video off, and I'll see if I can get it running again in a minute. They have a mouth and an anus that are combined. It's called a blind gut. They have two cell layers with something called mesoglea or jelly layer in between. They have stinging tentacles or other specialized cells for capturing food. These tentacles surround a toothless mouth. Some have very complex life cycles with attached and free swimming stages. Now, a jellyfish is an example of a cnidarian. So let's go ahead and take a look at some cnidarian examples. Here we have a stinging cnidocyte. This would be an animal such as a sea anemone. Sea anemones are attached to a coral, a rock, sometimes to a shell of a hermit crab, and they have little tentacles, like in the top left here, that are used to catch their prey. On the right, there's a little bit of a zoomed-in picture of the tips of the tentacles. They have nematocytes and triggers on the end of them. When they either feel threatened or they want to eat something, they take this coiled thread and they shoot it out of their tentacle and sting whatever prey they are trying to capture. Lots of times it is poisonous, so it will either kill the prey or it will stun the prey. Okay, here are some examples of sea anemones. They can be all different colors. They can be different shapes. But if you look at them, they all have radial symmetry. Let's take a second and look at these. Here are a couple of more sea anemones. The picture on the left here is of a sea anemone that has stunned a fish. The fish has now fallen into the sea anemone, so the sea anemone can now eat it. If you look at the top of the sea anemones on the right, the picture of at the top there, you can really see a good example of radial symmetry and how this sea anemone may be divided into lots of different equal parts. Coral is another example of a cnidaria. Here is another example of a cnidaria, one that if you live in the Northeast, you may have seen around quite a bit. This is a lion's mane jellyfish. Now this is a small one. Based on the kids who are sitting next to it, my guess is it is only a foot long or in diameter, maybe. But they can get to be up to 8 feet in diameter, which is probably like 2 of you. Head to toe, circle. So it's a pretty big, stinging cnidarian. Definitely not something I would want to come across as I was swimming. Next we have mollusca. Mollusca are a phyla that you may eat. Some of the species. Does anyone want to read about mollusca for us? Any volunteers? Go ahead, Paris. Thanks.
Soft body, often with shell or shells. Single foot, often used for locomotion. Radula present in all groups but bivalves. Second largest group of invertebrates. One-way gut.
Thank you so much. Mollusca are a soft-bodied animal, usually with a shell. On this picture, I have some examples with shells and some without. The girl on the bottom of the screen is looking at an octopus. An octopus is an example of a mollusca. It does not have a hard outer shell, but right above that is a picture of a scallop. That scallop is soft-bodied inside, and it does have the outer shell. So let's take a look at some better pictures. Here are some mollusca that have no shell. These are called nudibranchs. If you look at these animals, they are all different colors. They are all different shapes. But they all have a one-way gut, which means food goes in and out. These are examples of one-shelled mollusca. One-shelled mollusca means they have one shell. Here are some examples: limpets and snails. Okay, the top right there, that picture shouldn't be on this slide. I don't know how it snuck in there. But that's a picture of a bivalve. So let's forget the top right one is there. And let's look at the picture, the large picture of a moon snail. How many of you have ever been at a beach? Usually a muddy beach is where moon snails like to live. Where there's this weird, almost jelly, soft, circular thing, like that's in the picture right there. That is from a moon snail. There are also 8-shelled mollusca, like chitons. The 3 pictures towards the left are what 8-shelled chitons look like from above. They literally have 8 different shells. Underneath the 8 shells, you have the organism, the chitin, that's on the top right. It's a soft-bodied organism protected by those 8 shells. And probably the most common, here we have bivalves. Bivalves are protected by 2 shells, usually a top and a bottom that close. If you are eating a bivalve, steamers, clams, scallops, oysters, those are all bivalves. You are eating the soft-bodied organism in between. If you eat a scallop, all you're eating is that white center, and that is just the muscle that connects the top shell to the bottom shell. It's called his abductor muscle. And that's what you eat if you go out to dinner and you get scallops. The next phylum are Annelida. Now those are worms. Most of them are polychaete worms. Annelida are not something that you come across often. They have a one-way gut. They have a complex organ and sensory system. Some are very frilled and ornate, like the picture on the top right. Some are very simple, like the picture on the bottom right. Some live in tubes by hydrothermal vents, and some are free-living. They just live by themselves. And some live in groups or colonies. Annelida that live in colonies often rely on each other and work as a team almost to catch their prey. Now here we have Arthropoda. This is probably a phyla that you are familiar with. Would anyone like to read about Arthropoda? Any volunteers to read about Arthropoda? All right. Arthropoda have jointed appendages. You have a jointed arm. Your arm's in a jointed appendage. Just means you can bend it. They have an exoskeleton. An exoskeleton is a hard outer shell. We don't have one, but they do. Crabs, lobsters, shrimp. They have a complex organ system and sensory system. They have gills. They have a stomach. They are the largest animal phylum, if you include marine and terrestrial Arthropoda. They do something called molt during growth. What molting means? Anyone have an idea? Molting. As an Arthropoda is growing, it molts. You do not molt. Molting simply means sorry about that. Molting simply means that the Arthropoda needs a new shell. Since they have a hard exoskeleton, it doesn't grow. So as the crab is growing, it needs a new exoskeleton. So it gets rid of its old exoskeleton and grows a new one. When a crab sheds its exoskeleton, you may find them sitting on the beach or on a mudflat. It looks like it's the same shape of a crab. There's just no crab in it. As it's growing its new exoskeleton, they tend to hide under rocks, in crevices. They're very vulnerable at that time. They don't want to get eaten because their shell is soft. They puff themselves up with air so that they have room to grow in this new shell. Eggs of an Arthropoda are cared for by the females, and most have bilateral symmetry. So let's take a look. Here is an example of a molt of a crab and a live crab. The bottom picture is a live crab. The top picture is the molt of that same crab. As you see, the live crab is larger. He got rid of his old exoskeleton because he needed to grow. He now can grow into his new exoskeleton. If you look underneath a crab, if you're at a beach, you might see tiny little red or orange, sometimes green circles, depending on the species of crab. Those are the female's eggs. So here are some Arthropoda examples. There are some spider crabs up here on the left. And the top right looks like a rock crab. I'm not sure what type the bottom is, but he certainly is a type of crab. We have a hermit crab here. The top right looks like an Alaskan king crab with the long, long, long claws. And I'm not sure what species the bottom two are. The bottom right may be another spider crab. A lot of times spider crabs like to decorate their shells with seaweed. Sometimes snails and barnacles will hop on. Here are some more arthropoda, a shrimp or krill in the top left. Some sort of water bug in the top right. And then in the bottom you have all different types of barnacles. If you look at the picture in the middle on the bottom, you can see a barnacle with its feeders out. Those little feathers coming out of the center of the hard-shelled barnacle are how a barnacle feeds. Pretty cool, if you ask me. And the last group we are going to talk about today are echinodermata. What on earth are echinodermata? Well, echinodermata are something that you probably have seen time and time again. Starfish or sea stars are examples of echinodermata. Sand dollars are examples of echinodermata. Echinodermata typically have radial symmetry as adults. They have tube feet. If you've ever flipped a starfish over, you can see hundreds and thousands of little tube feet. It's how the animal scooches and moves across the bottom or across a pole coming out of the water. They have an internal skeleton in echinodermata. It's called a test. They often have spines. And they have a complex organ and sensory system. So let's take a look at some specifics. Here we have echinodermata, or sea stars. Echinodermata can live underwater and can be above water. The bottom picture here is showing a picture of some sea stars attached to a rock. At high tide, they're probably covered by the water. And at low tide here, they're exposed to the air. So echinodermata, sea stars in particular, are very resilient. They can withstand lots of extremes. On the right-hand side, in the top, this is the underside of the sea star. The middle there, that kind of what looks like a black hole, that's the sea star's mouth. That's where its food, or it needs to get its food to. You can also see some of the tube feet. On each leg or ray of a starfish, there are hundreds of these tube feet. Here are some more sea stars, just different varieties. Some sea stars have 5 legs or rays. Some have 10 or 20. Some have a very skinny circular base or center. Some have a very wide flat base. It all depends on the type of sea star. Another echinodermata is a sea urchin. Now a sea urchin, from the top, looks like the 2 pictures on the right. It has spines coming out of it. Some are poisonous, some are not. It can move those spines just like a sea star can move its legs and its tube feet, and that's how it moves across the bottom. It can be attached to rocks, like the picture on the top right. It can live outside of the water. It's tidal, so it can be above water for a little, below water for a little. But if you were to take a sea urchin and flip it over, it would look like the picture on the top left. It has little, almost teeth or beaks. That is very hard. And if you were to take that out of a sea urchin, you would see the picture on the bottom left. That is what the internal structure inside the exoskeleton of a sea urchin looks like. It's circular. It almost comes to a point at the top with those little teeth that it uses to break up its food. Another animal that is an invertebrate, is an echinodermata, is a sand dollar. Many of you may have collected sand dollars from the beach. If you've seen a sand dollar up on the beach, it's probably bleached white. It's because it's been rolling around in the surf, and the sun has begun to bleach it. If you were to see a sand dollar in the ocean and it was alive, it would look the color of the top right or bottom left picture. It would be a purpley brown color. And the last member of the echinodermata is a sea cucumber. Now, a sea cucumber has the tube feet as well. If you look at the top left, they can be lots of different sizes, and they can be lots of different colors. Okay. One thing that scientists use in order to determine what phylum an animal belongs to, not just for invertebrates, for all types of animals, is called a taxonomist or a dichotomous key. Raise your hand if you have ever used a dichotomous or taxonomic key. Okay, we have one person who has. A taxonomic key or dichotomous key is something that it's very important for you guys to learn how to use. Like I said, you can use it with invertebrates, you can use it with trees, you can use it with mammals. We are going to use it with invertebrates. So on your PowerPoint screen right now, I put up a sample of a dichotomous key. It's okay if you can't read it perfectly. I will go ahead and read it for you. So a taxonomic key, most of the times, is a dichotomous key. That means it has two branches, which means that it's written with a series of two choices to be made about the anatomy of an animal, or in our case, a picture of the animal that you are looking at. Keys are not made to be read from start to finish like a book or a poem. In each numbered series, you should read both choices, determine which best applies to the specimen you are looking at, and then go where the key tells you to go. Oftentimes, you are going to skip steps that don't apply. So we are going to go ahead and do a sample taxonomic key. We are going to use the crab that we looked at the beginning of class. That picture is still on your whiteboard if you need to refer back to it. So we are going to think. The first question about your crab, or the crab in the picture, is, does it have radial symmetry or asymmetry? And if it does, we are going to go to question 2. And if it has bilateral symmetry, we are going to go to question 4. So looking at the crab that's on your whiteboard, raise your hand if you want to give me an answer. Are you looking at bilateral symmetry, which means we're going to skip to question 4? Or are we looking at radial or asymmetry? DeAndre, what do you think?
Bilateral symmetry.
Awesome. We are going to go to bilateral, or it is bilateral symmetry. So we then skip question 2, we skip question 3, and we're going to go to question 4. So I'm going to go ahead and type question 4 here right on your whiteboard so we can just be looking at one screen. So for question 4, and we are going to take a look at this next description. Does this invertebrate have legs? If the answer is yes, go to question 5. If it is no, go to question 6. So go ahead and write in the text chat which question are we going to go to. Good job. We are going to go to question 5. Okay, question 5 is up here. It says, does this invertebrate have a round abdomen? If your answer is yes, it is a crab. If your answer is no, it is a lobster. Which is it? Go ahead and put it in the text chat. Is this a crab or is this a lobster? The answer is yes, it is a crab. Great job. Each taxonomic key or dichotomous key is going to be a little bit different. It is based on the pictures you are looking at. Your homework this week is going to be to look at some pictures and use a dichotomous key to find the correct answers. You're going to do the best you can. I know for all but one of you, this is the first time you will use a dichotomous key. If you have questions, you are going to either call me or email me, and I will try to walk you through it. What I would like to do now is we had 2 presentations that we were not able to share last week, I believe. One of them was Paul's. Okay, Paul, would you like to share your presentation or would you like me to go ahead and read it? I have it up on the whiteboard. Go right ahead, just hit the talk button.
I can't really see it very well. I can't really see it very well.
Okay, unfortunately I can't make it any larger than it is. If you're having a hard time reading it, I will go ahead and read it for you. So Paul did the saltwater angelfish. The saltwater angelfish are found in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, the majority of them being found in the West Pacific Ocean. Angelfish live in the shallow reefs. The saltwater angelfish come in many colors and sizes. They can be as small as 4 inches and as large as 2 feet. Younger angelfish have different coloration than the adult angelfish. They have crescent tail fins, and many have decorative streamers from some of their fins. Saltwater angel likes to live by themselves, but some live in pairs or small groups. They can be aggressive to other fish, but are curious of divers. Angelfish feed on different types of algae and smaller fish and shrimp. They are the prey to sharks and other larger animals of the ocean, and even people. Some smaller ones are also hunted by birds. Even though they are hunted by many things, they are not endangered. I like them because they are colorful and they look neat. Good job, Paul. And the other one we have was DeAndre, and he did the lionfish. Would you like to share yours, DeAndre, or would you like me to read yours? All right, go right ahead. Hit your talk button.
I did the lionfish, and the lionfish is native to the Indian Ocean, but can also be found in the Red Sea, in the Sea, South Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. They prefer to live in mangroves, seagrass, crevices, lagoons, coral reefs, and even shipwrecks. And the behavior is the lionfish may hide in crevices during daytime because they are nocturnal. They also hunt at night, and it doesn't have many predators because of its venomous spines. The lionfish hunt at night. Lionfish are slow because they hunt for smaller prey and eat them whole. Also, they trap their prey by ambushing and cornering using their fins. They eat shrimp, crustaceans, smaller fish, and smaller lionfish. The features are the lionfish have 18 needles like sharp venomous spines on its dorsal fins. They usually have red and zebras on their body, but also can be tan or gray in color as well. They can grow to about 15 inches. Female can lay over 2 million eggs a year. Their venom contains neurotoxins which make a human have nausea and breathing difficulties, but is rarely fatal. Also, they are popular food trays in parts of the world. Lionfish are a very popular aquarium fish.
Great job. Thank you for sharing with us. Everyone in here did an awesome job on their presentations. I'm glad that you were all able to share them with the rest of us. The one thing that's kind of neat about lionfish, and I'm glad that DeAndre chose them, is they were introduced off the coast of Florida. And it's a perfect habitat for them. They like the temperature of the water. There are not a lot of predators, natural predators of them. And they are beginning to overtake the coastal waters of Florida. So when people have aquariums and they let the animals go out of the aquariums, things, meaning the lionfish that they released, can begin to take over the waters of that area. As they take over the waters, they are harming the animals that naturally live there. If you guys could go ahead and look at your whiteboard, I am putting a chart up here, and we are going to come up with some characteristics that would fall into these categories. What can you think of, either examples of these animals or characteristics of these animals, being vertebrates like fish and sharks that we talked about last week, or invertebrates that we talked about today? So we're going to take the last 5 minutes of class today to review and compare these two species, or these two types of animals. Let's go ahead and put up what you can. All right, if you can't think of any characteristics, you can go ahead and add some examples up here. You all should be able to at least come up with examples of invertebrates since we just talked about them. All right, let's take a look at what you guys have up here. For vertebrates, they have a dorsal fin. Great. Sharks are an example. They have paired and single fins. Their skeletons are made of cartilage or bones, and they have backbones. Fantastic. For invertebrates, they have an exoskeleton. They have no backbone. Crabs. Sea stars, sand dollars, and they have symmetry. Perfect. They are divided into groups of phyla. They can be identified using a dichotomous key. Sea urchins, jellyfish, and sea cucumbers. Fantastic. You guys did a great job in class today. Your homework for the week is in Moodle. It is going to be to use a dichotomous key. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that we got to all the different phyla that are on there. So give me about an hour before you do this week's homework. I hope you have a great week, and if you have any questions, as always, feel free to give me a call or send me an email.